So before we get going, just a few reminders to keep in mind. Nope.
Nope.
Welcome. We are glad you're joining us today. We are the...
Oh my goodness.
Justin.
I apologize. All right.
Welcome. We are glad you're joining us today. We are the Mental Health and Behavior Support Services Department of Stockton Unified School District. In times of uncertainty, there is one thing we know. Students, families, and educators are resilient, creative, and tenacious. Our students need support, and we, as parents and educators, also need support to provide support. Here, we provide brave and safe places to engage in wellness. Want to know more about us? We recommend going to our website, which can be found off the Stockton Unified School District main page. There, click on Departments and Programs and go to Mental Health Behavior Support Services tab. Today you are attending a talk by our department. This talk is to give you some general information on a given topic. You should expect that part of the time will be informational and part of the time will be spent engaging in either discussion or practice. In all of our talks, we ask that you provide the other members with not only a safe space, but a brave space to speak freely. This means that we ask the following of you. Be kind to each other and yourself. Be respectful of the needs of the members in this group. Be honest in your discussions and be supportive of each other. To be supportive and create a safe space for others, we need to be confidential. That means absolutely no recording of meetings or chats. If you record these meetings, you will be asked to stop immediately. What happens here stays here. Please do not share members' names or student names outside of this meeting. While we ask you all to be confidential, we cannot force you. Therefore, we caution you that what is shared here cannot be made fully confidential, and we are also mandated reporters of abuse and neglect. Finally, always feel free to reach out to us directly if you have needs that require more individual and confidential attention. While we hope to provide you with some help today, our support and time during this group is limited. If you find that you have more questions or have identified more needs, that's okay. That's even great. Let us know, and we'll be sure to follow up with you individually after this talk. One last thing. If you're attending a virtual meeting, you are muted upon entry. Don't worry, we will make sure that you're unmuted during times of discussion so that you can speak freely to us. If you have immediate questions, please share them in the chat. And please don't Zoom and drive. We ask that you follow the rules of the road and be safe. Thank you for your time, and most importantly, thank you for joining us.
Alrighty, so we want to remind you again, also we do have support. We have somebody who's monitoring the chat. If there's a question that you have, like you don't understand something we're talking about, please feel free to ask. If it's about your personal life and whatnot, those we can't really address directly, but if you have a question, make sure to frame it more generally. We can address that. And if there's something you don't understand, let us know, and then we have support. She will say, hey, we got a question, and we're happy to clear that up, okay? This time, so last time we talked about some fundamentals to trauma. This time we're going to continue. Last time was a bit easier. This time I think it gets a little bit more complex as far as you're going to take some stuff and apply it to yourself, to your kids, to the students you work with. It's going to get a little bit more personal. We don't go into trauma details, nothing like that, but there is definitely a higher chance, I would say, of triggering your own trauma, just due to the nature of what we're going into. So get up and move around if you need to. Use a fidget, use a restroom, get some water if you need to. This is being recorded. The plan is that it will live somewhere else, probably on YouTube, forever. So if you have to stop here, that is totally okay, and it will live somewhere else eventually. Now, this is also real quick. with SUSD, we do keep equity in mind. We want to make sure this is applicable to as many people as we possibly can and accessible. We do have a Spanish language version being worked on as well, but this is for everybody. We all have the same biology. Last time we talked about the autonomic nervous system. This applies to absolutely everybody, no matter your circumstances, your race, your religion, your gender, your politics, no matter what. This is 100% applicable to any human being. Why it's important? Again, just to know the pieces underneath trauma, to better understand trauma, and we are still working on the building blocks of these things. And today we're going to get more in depth into how this actually connects to trauma. To create a common language amongst each other, such as police, teachers, clinicians like Mercedes and I, parents, to better understand the motivation of the people that we serve, and also to understand ourselves better. We'll be able to see what's happening in the kids that we serve, or our own kids, but also within ourselves to understand what we're going through. So last time we talked about the primary autonomic states. That was safety, the safe and social state, flight, fight, and shutdown. And I believe Mercedes is going to the mixed states.
I believe you are, Justin, but I can if you want.
No, I got it. All right, so the first mixed state is freeze. So this is what happens when you combine the flight fight system plus the shutdown system. So what this means is you have that flight fight energy active while also having the shutdown immobilization active. So the still, being still. So you have a high level of energy, but you're not moving. This is called freeze. So this feels more like on a day-to-day basis, it feels like a panic attack. If you ever had a panic attack, like I am terrified of heights, and there's a bridge that I go when I drive over it, which I avoid at all costs. But when I have to go over this bridge, I tense up. My breathing becomes very, very shallow and rapid. So I can't move, but my muscles are very tense and my breathing gets shallow. So it's like a panic attack. So I'm very revved up. I have that energy going, but I'm immobile. So this can come through forced immobilization, where there's a high level of energy within you, and then you're forced to immobilize, like a sexual assault, or being anesthetized, like before surgery. A lot of kids or even adults will be highly revved up, but then they're forced into what do you call it? Unconsciousness, or what do you call that? I don't know if that's
Unconscious, yeah.
Yeah, but that energy is still inside of them while they go under after they're being anesthetized. So when they come out of surgery, they'll be flailing their limbs. There's a huge amount of energy that comes with it because it's stuck inside of them. But this also is through perceived immobilization, like in my example of being on the bridge. Actually, it's not perceived. I can't run away. I can't fight. So no, it's different. But if you perceive that you can't run away, if you perceive that you can't fight, and you have that high level of energy, this is kind of like a panic attack, like if you're just in your room right now or later on, and you have a high level of energy, but you perceive that you can't run away or can't fight from it, that might result in a panic attack or that freeze state. So with our girlfriends here, what we see is that, let me take that down. What we see is that they are highly revved up, but then they perceive that they cannot run away, they can't fight back because those mean humans are just being mean. And so they get really revved up really fast, but at the same time, their shutdown system kicks in, so they freeze and just sort of topple over. All right, so that's the first mixed state. The second mixed state is play. This is where you have the safe and social system, so the top of your ladder, active along with the flight fight system, so that mobilization system. So you have those two active, and that equals play. So there's energy while being safe, while being socially engaged. So play is shared. So we do something like we play with a ball together, we do a puzzle together. It's synchronous, which meaning it's happening at the same time. We're in the same state. Two people that are playing both have access to their flight fight system and their safe and social system. And play is also, you follow the same rules. If one person's like cheating and the other person's following the rules, that's not play. So there's something different happening there. Play is extremely important. It is extremely important because it exercises the ability to move up and down the ladder. It's called the polyvagal ladder. but up and down our ladders, our nervous system ladders. So when you play, like, you activate movement, you activate safety, but you also, if you play freeze tag, you become really still. So you activate freeze. If you play hide and seek, you might use that shutdown sort of system to be still and quiet. So it uses all of these states, but in a socially acceptable, playful way, which means you can exercise the ability to go up and down the ladder. It's extremely important for child development. Face-to-face contact is also, and we're going to go into that later on, very, very important. Actually, I think that's next.
I think that's part 3.
Yeah, co-regulation and face-to-face contact, very, very important. But when you make facial contact with the person you're playing with, it signals that I'm safe. If I'm giving you safety cues through my face, it shows that we're playing, I'm safe. Play can be just sharing attention, like on a puzzle, a ball, like playing catch, but working. Mercedes and I created this together. This was work, but we worked on it together. We were also in our safe and social state, so it was play as well. Work can be, not all work is play, but it can be play.
You can have fun while you work.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. But for traumatized individuals, so for people who are in a more defensive state, more down the ladder, play can actually become unsafe. So we need to be able to accept co-regulation, which we'll talk more about next time. We have to be able to accept those facial cues. We have to be able to accept somebody else's safety cues. And we have to have a stronger social engagement system. And if you've heard of or worked with those kids that, quote unquote, don't play well with others, that's what we're talking about, is that they'll start playing a basketball game, but all of a sudden it turns into something else. And that kid is no longer playing. So that's what I mean. They don't play well with others. What we're saying is that their ability to play, to use their safety system along with their flight-fight system, is kind of compromised. And again, so play activates the flight-fight system. So we have that system being used, but we have to have the safe and social system at the top of the ladder being used as well. We have to have that active. Without that safety system at the top of the ladder, without that active, it's just flight-flight behaviors. And for those kids that don't play well with others, quote unquote, when they lose access to their safety system at the top of their ladder, when they lose access to that biological circuitry, it just becomes either running away and avoiding the play or avoiding the situation, or it becomes fight, like it becomes more aggressive situation. So we have to have that safety system active. And the ability to play well with others is extremely dependent on our own play history. So that's what we said earlier in this last slide, that your ability to play, your history of play is extremely, what would we say? It exercises the ability to move up and down the ladder. So if you have a history of play with siblings, with parents, with people in the neighborhood, with safe adults at school, if you have that, you'll be able to go up and down the ladder easier and be able to play more appropriately later on. So this is a video here. What I want you to do is watch these two dogs here. And you can, in the chat if you like, you can tell us, are they playing or not? You actually might even be able to tell just from this still image here, but watch this and tell us, are they playing or no? So was that play or was that something else? And you may have noticed that their voices became very deep. They were growling. They lost access to any vocal prosody. Humans have lots of prosody, that ability to go up and down and use our voice to show what we mean. Dogs probably have less, but they do have some. And those two little doggies there, they had none. It was completely gone. Their voices were very deep, very aggressive, right? So right there, they were out of their safety system, which means this was not play. Their faces were also just showing anger and aggression and not a fuller range of, doggy faces. Their ears, I think, were pinned back, Mercedes, is that right?
Yeah, when they're angry, the dogs do, like, their ears are kind of down and back. They're baring their teeth, which is not a sign of safety, but a sign of aggression. And there wasn't a lot of face-to-face. I don't know if you guys noticed that, but Justin mentioned the face-to-face interaction during play, and the dogs were actually facing away from each other. Again, not a sign of safety, a sign of aggression.
Yeah, so every indication there was that was not play. They were dead serious. Dead serious about those toys. Dead serious about that food, yeah. I will do another video and tell us, are these two playing or not?
We got one comment. We got one
Okay.
comment that says play.
Yeah.
Another comment. I don't think they were playing because of the growling. They were baring their teeth. I didn't see any teeth baring in this one. I heard some kitty cat prosody. I don't know if you guys caught the cat meowing, but it was. I don't have cats, and I don't know a lot about cats, but to me it sounds playful. They were looking at each other in the face, and instead of having their ears up and back, their ears were up and forward, which is a sign of like alertness and being, attentive to each other. They were wagging their tail. Well, the dog was wagging its tail. So there's lots of cues there of safety and of play. I said what? I feel like I'm missing one. I said face to face.
Cat prosody. They were making face contact. Yeah, those are the two biggest ones. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So yeah, these two not playing. These two playing.
Yeah. So cute.
And the last mixed state, we have freeze, we have play. The last one is stillness. This is the safe and social system at the top of the ladder being used along with the shutdown system at the bottom of the ladder. So when those two are being used at the same time, we call that stillness. So this is the ability to be still without fear. This is extremely important day-to-day life, sitting in silence, using self-reflection, using the restroom, being intimate, sleeping, sitting in a classroom. This is extremely, extremely important. But there's that word neuroception. So for people who live more down the ladder, their body's going to detect that this is not safe. Being still is not safe. If you ever lay down to go to sleep at nighttime and you get like there's too much energy to it, there's too much anxiety, you're thinking about the next day, or you're thinking about what happened that day and what that person said, you're not accessing your top of the ladder safety system and the bottom of the ladder still shutdown system. So when you lay down to go to sleep, you might have too much energy, you might have too much fight energy, and when you lay down, it's not going to feel safe, so you're not going to be able to go to sleep right away. Here's some pictures of stillness. Top left, we have the kids in class sitting perfectly still, soaking it all in, baby falling asleep, the man and the woman just being close to each other, very important. Top right as well, and then using the restroom in the bottom right. Thought that was an appropriate picture. But all of these things, you have to have stillness. You have to have access to your shutdown and your safety system at the same time.
Okay, so I'm sorry, you guys. I always giggle at the elf on the shelf going to the bathroom, and he has a little peppermints. Anyway, so I'm still giggling about that, and I can't let it go. We're going to go into trauma. It feels inappropriate because I'm giggling, and we're going to talk about something serious.
Bad transition.
But okay. So we're going to go into trauma, and I do want to give you guys another forewarning here that we are going to talk a little bit more in detail, nothing specific, but just be aware of your own state and your own self right now, and just make sure that if you need to take a break or step away for a minute, you're welcome to do so. Excuse me. So what is trauma? Trauma is not so much the event itself, but it's actually the response to the event. This is a really important distinction because if Justin and I are both in the same car accident, one of us might be traumatized and one of us might not. And that depends on the response. We might have different responses to the same event. So trauma is actually the response to the event. And it's also a second definition in our context is being stuck in a defensive state. So being stuck in a state of flight or fight or shutdown or freeze, which we'll go into a little bit more detail in just a minute. A couple of different sources of traumatic responses. Trauma can come from a one-time event like a car accident, injuries, violent attacks, assaults, especially when things happen in childhood. So we're from the school district and we're talking about working with kids as parents and as school staff. So things that happen in childhood especially are extremely traumatizing for people, or can be extremely traumatizing, even if it's a one-time event. Another form of trauma is ongoing or relentless stress. So things like living in a crime-ridden neighborhood, battling a life-threatening illness, Things that are kind of just constant and chronic and feel never ending, these things can cause a traumatic response as well. Bullying, domestic violence, neglect and abuse, things like that. And then some commonly overlooked causes of trauma are things like surgery. Justin mentioned that before, kind of going under anesthesia and kind of having that freeze response. The sudden death of someone close, things that are humiliating or deeply disappointing. There's a few different commonly overlooked causes of trauma. So something to keep in mind as well. So there's really two paths to trauma. Again, we mentioned the acute life threat reaction, things like car crashes or school shootings. The first path to trauma is more of a freeze response. So exactly what Justin was talking about a minute ago with the combination of the flight fight energy and the shutdown response. The second path to trauma is chronic disruption of connectedness. So things like neglect, different forms of abuse. This is when people get stuck in a flight or a fight or a shutdown state when there's just this ongoing disruption of connection with others. So we have some statistics here just to highlight the prevalence of trauma. These all come from the Center for Disease Control. So 1 in 8 Americans have witnessed their mother being beaten or hit. 1 in 5 were sexually molested as a child. That's 20%. That's insane.
Yeah.
1 in 4 were beaten by a parent to the point of a mark being left on their body. That's 25% of people. Can you say the two paths to trauma? Should we go back and do the two paths of trauma?
Sure.
So these are the two paths of trauma. We'll try, I'll try and leave it. I mean, Justin, we'll try and leave it up for a minute. So the two paths again are the acute life threat reaction. That's kind of like the one-time thing, like the car crash, the school shooting, a terrorist attack, a sexual assault. And this is really a freeze response.
You survived.
Huh?
Like there was one thing that you survived. You went through a thing,
Mm-hmm.
survived it, but it left you in a disrupted or a down the ladder.
Yeah. And it's most closely associated to the freeze, right? This is
This would be
typically
like
a freeze response situation.
this would be closer to PTSD.
Mm-hmm.
This would be, so it's like if you're in that situation again, or if you're around something that smells like it, looks like it,
triggers, yeah.
You'll be that little thing, that reminder will trigger you right back to that defensive state. Now, away from those triggers, you're probably fine, but that freeze energy is kind of underneath everything you do a lot of times. And that's from surviving a thing and then not being able to get back up to your safety system.
Mm-hmm. And then that second path is the chronic disruption of connectedness. So this is kind of like, I don't like to compare the two types of trauma, but you can kind of think of the first one as like a big event. And then the second one is like a lot of little events kind of happening back to back. And again, I'm not trying to compare them. I'm not saying one is worse than the other. They're both obviously traumatizing. Yeah. But the second one is kind of an ongoing kind of back-to-back experience of the same thing. And it typically has to do with disrupting connected. I'm so sorry, guys. Disrupting connections. Yeah. So when our connections with other people, safe people especially, are broken. And again, the examples are neglect and the different forms of abuse.
This is really, a lot of this comes from like abusive, neglectful homes. A child is not born directly into their safety state, I don't think. They have to kind of build the capacity to, build the strength of their safety state. So if they have a parent that is not meeting their basic needs, then the ability to climb the top of the ladder and stay there is really, really compromised. And they kind of exist down the ladder and never being able to really achieve, not never, but being less likely to achieve higher up the ladder. It is definitely possible. And these are the kids that we work with in therapy, like very, very possible. But it does make things a lot more difficult, just day-to-day life. Mm-hmm. So hopefully that clears that up. I'm not watching the comments. Hopefully that clears that up.
I think they said, thank you.
Okay.
And you're welcome. So can you go back? I think we missed this one. So these are just the statistics about the prevalence of traumatic experiences. So 1 in 3 couples engage in physical violence. That's a huge number. and 25% of people grew up with alcoholic parents. So the big thing about this is that humans stay stuck in trauma. And we're going to show a video in just a second of how an animal releases their trauma. But this is a big message here, is that humans stay stuck in trauma. Because what happens is that even though our bodies are reacting to the environment, if you think back to part one, right? All of this is biological. All of this is hardwired inside of our bodies and our brains. This is how our bodies are supposed to react. Except when we get stuck, that's where it becomes a problem, right? And what happens with humans is that we feel fear along with all the stuff that's happening inside of our bodies. And so, I'm sorry, were you going to say something, Justin?
No.
Oh. So when our bodies are trying to come out of freeze or shutdown, we associate that sensation, that physical, biological sensation, with fear. And then that's where trauma happens. We create stories about the event that keeps us stuck in trauma. Things like, it was my fault, I shouldn't have done that, I shouldn't have been there, you know, I shouldn't have said this thing, or da 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 da. There's lots of thoughts, beliefs, blame, judgment that we place on ourselves. And those are the stories that help keep us stuck in trauma. And on top of all of that, we also tend to isolate and keep things secret. And so when we do that, as human beings, we're social creatures, and we need to connect with other people. We need what's called co-regulation, which we'll go into in part 3. But when we isolate ourselves, we're not getting that co-regulation. We're not getting that social connection that we need as human beings, and it keeps us stuck in that traumatic place. So this is a example of an animal coming out of trauma. Do you want to say more about that, Justin?
No, I'm sorry. You got it.
Okay. I think I took over. I think you were supposed to, but
so
this is a polar bear who, based on our experience, you guys, this is my disclaimer. People have a hard time watching this video, and Justin and I like to say that the polar bear is fine at the end. We promise. It is hard to watch a little bit, but it's really, really valuable to see how this polar bear comes out of trauma. So quick setup. These are scientific researchers. They are not trying to harm the polar bear. They're just trying to study the polar bear, and you'll see what happens.
They're using a tranquilizer.
Sleep the thing off.
So we know that was hard to watch. We're gonna go into why, but just to help ourselves feel a little bit better, here's another video.
This is a palate cleanser for everyone.
Palate cleanser. Let's talk real quick about what happened in the polar bear video. So in the polar bear video, what we saw was it had its flight-fight system activated. It was running away, so the flight system was active. And then I stopped the screen share. And you couldn't really see it, but it was looking backward at the helicopter and using its teeth. So its fight system was active as well. But then it got put under, basically. It got tranquilized.
Yeah.
With all that energy still in it. So it got immobilized. So it's kind of like a freeze state where it had tons of energy inside of it, but then it got forced to immobilize, which is really a freeze state. So what we saw when it started coming out of being tranquilized, all that energy had to come out. So it started shaking it off. Animals do this really, really, really well. Humans don't do this very well. We can, but we don't really do this for all the reasons that Mercedes listed earlier. I see this in therapy every now and then, where I have a student I'm working with who has survived something, and I see them, like, it's not as severe as that, but they'll like shake it off, and they'll say, I feel these waves, these tingling feelings, all these things coming through me. And actually, you've probably felt it as well. If you ever think about someone that you're around, have you ever been in a situation where things just felt a bit creepy and you go like this, ooh, like you get that feeling all over your body and you go, ooh, you just like shake it off. That's a very small example of what the polar bear went through. It's the same thing. So the polar bear had to shake it off, and then you saw its breathing start to regulate, those big breaths. So it had to re-regulate itself and come back up to its safety system, and it was fine after that, we promise. But that's what you saw, was animals do that really well and really naturally. There's no judgments in their mind. They're not embarrassed. They don't have to isolate. It'll go back to its family or polar bear herd or whatever they do, and it's just fine.
Well, I think, again, the important point, I'm not trying to like kill the point. But the point here is that mammals are built to do that. We as human beings are also mammals, and we are also built to do that. The difference is that if we were to go through something like that, if you imagine yourself going through it, crying is a version of that for human beings. And if you've ever had like a really good, like hard cry and just like you're like convulsing and you're just sobbing and you're just like letting it all out, and then you do kind of feel better afterwards. But then think about all the thoughts that come after that. You know, big girls don't cry, or men don't cry, or I should be able to handle this, or I should be stronger than this. I wish people hadn't seen me. There's all these stories that come after the release of the trauma that keep us stuck in trauma, right? So that's what happened. That's the difference between not mammals. That's the difference between animals and humans, is that we keep ourselves kind of stuck there.
Yeah. But if you let yourself cry, like a good cry, you feel that convulsing, the breathing regulates itself. You kind of shake, you ball up, like it's all the pieces there. So we can do it. We don't always allow ourselves to do it though. So if we don't do that and we keep that, if we stay stuck down the ladder with all that flight, fight energy, that shutdown stuff, that free stuff, if we keep that within us and we don't go up the top of our ladder, it has a lot of consequences on our body, because our body is now primed for danger instead of connection and safety. So there's this thing called ACEs, which stands for
Adverse Childhood Experiences
Totally
Study.
drew a blank there. Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. This was through CDC and Kaiser from, I want to say like 20 years ago or so.
Yeah, late 90s, I believe.
Yeah, they found that people who have higher levels of trauma, and they have like 10 questions. It is not all inclusive. There's definitely more sources of trauma, potential trauma. But they asked 10 questions. You can find it online for free if you want to, see what your ACEs score is. But the higher score, they saw that there was a much bigger physical toll on the body, higher rates of mental illness, stuff like that. So here's some sources. I think this is what they asked, right? Yeah.
These are the areas where they asked the 10 questions. Yeah.
And they found that there was all of these results from it, or higher levels of these things with higher levels of an ACE score. So all of these things here, these sources of trauma, have a direct toll on the human body, which leads to these things. If we cannot get to the top of if we can't get to the top of our ladders, then the body is always in this flight, fight, defensive place, and it's using its resources because it thinks that it needs to defend itself. But when we're in our social engagement system, the body optimizes its resources for health and growth and restoration. We can actually see there's a couple of microcosms of this as well. If we look at law enforcement, nearly 1 in 4 police officers has thought about suicide at some point in their life. And the idea here is that with police officers, they have higher levels of flight, fight, freeze, shutdown stuff going on than the rest of us do. And there's probably other, I would assume, like EMTs would as well. We have
firefighters, kind of like those first responders.
They're always sort of waiting and preparing for danger, and they interact with real danger as well at a much higher rate than the rest of us do. More police die by suicide than in line of duty. In 2017, there was an estimated 140 law enforcement suicides. Compared to the general population, law enforcement report much higher rates of depression, PTSD, burnout, and other anxiety-related mental health conditions. And this really hit me. Police live an average of 9 years less than the general population. That's like almost a tenth. So if I live to be 100, that police officer will live to be 90. That's a huge decrease, obviously. Mm-hmm. But also nurses. Nurses have higher rates of suicide than the general population, and clinical depression is twice as high than the general population. And teachers are more prone to developing secondary traumatic stress, also known as burnout, compassion fatigue, vicarious trauma. Teachers reported a decline in their mental health. In 2015, 34% reported a decline. In 2017, 58% recorded a decline. So all of these have pretty darn high levels of stress, right? And we can see that it directly takes a toll on the body or on mental health, because you're always in that, you're out of your social engagement safety system and down the ladder. So what do we need for safety to reach our social engagement safety system at the top of the ladder? We need safe people and safe environments, not just safe people, not just safe environments, but really we need both of those. But the perception of safety does override actual environmental safety. We need ongoing opportunities to interact with safe environments and safe people, with safe others and safe environments. So not just once, but ongoing. We can't just have a safe environment we go to. I mean, it's better than nothing, but ideally we go to a safe school, we go to a safe home, we live in a safe neighborhood. With ongoing safety, we can access the top of our ladders and have that social engagement active more likely or more often. We also need reliable relationships, so not just safe environments, but safe people in those environments that provide reliable relationships that you can count on, that are give and take, so it's a shared thing. There's empathy, which means that we understand each other. There's understanding. So we have to have reliable relationships as well as the reliable and safe environments. We also need time spent with safe people doing shared activities like play and work. Thank you. That's about it. So it is possible. That's it for today. Yeah, it is definitely possible for humans to get to the top of their ladder. It is not as easy, but we do have it within us to be able to do so. But safety is obviously a big part of that.